I seem to have embarked on this project of making work in a number of different media around this notion of green humans. There isn't one reason that it happened, because there's never one reason for anything in my work. But to the extent that I understand it, it has something to do with wanting to isolate ideas about maleness and femaleness as subjects within sort of structural abstract approach to making paintings, and an extra layer of it, almost a fantasy I was having about my own work at the time I started, was that artists receive their work as though it were transmitted to them from some external source. That's often the experience I have when I'm working. So I think this, to the extent that there's any story that holds the whole group of green things together, it's this notion that a somewhat alien version of humanity is having images of itself transmitted to the artist, and the artist is attempting to faithfully make paintings about them. Paintings, prints, and drawings, actually, but in this exhibition, specifically paintings. Qualiascope is an imaginary device that has been talked about within neuroscience discussions and philosophical discussions. It's not a real thing, but the idea of it is that it would be a kind of device that could measure whether living beings are conscious or inanimate objects are conscious. I see it as poetically supporting the tone that my work seems to want to maintain. Somatic transmission is a term that came into my mind as I was working because, as I said earlier, I've been thinking a lot about how transmission is a way that art comes to the artist, but also somatic in English refers to things of the body and has the connotation of, like the way we say psychosomatic, a kind of relationship between mind and body that may not be entirely healthy. And again, these are like poetic titles that support my sense of the sort of direction of the work. For some reason, I seem to need to distance everything through this device of greenness, a kind of literal alienation, I guess, in order to be able to work with male and female subjects together in the painting. I haven't been able to make that work before, from my own point of view. But it seemed clear to me when I found myself backing into this whole period of my work of so-called figurative painting, it was a surprise to me. And it seemed clear that for it to be fully developed, there would have to be a point when maleness and femaleness could coexist in the same paintings like they do in the world. But I never really saw that clearly, how that could be, until I stumbled into this period of my work. I mean, everything is continuous. I see my work as continuous from the very beginning. I often get a surprised reaction when I say that, because I understand the work I make now looks very different from the work I made when I was much younger, and because I saw my work began very clearly as abstract painting. That's what I always thought I was doing. I have come to this point against a lot of resistance on my own part. But when I did enter this new area, this green period of my work, I felt like there was some sort of a shift that meant that I was in a different place. And I think that's mostly visible in the structural changes, not so much whether they're recognizable subjects or whether they're abstract paintings or whatever. The structure in these paintings, the way that the subjects are framed, in some way separated from the rest of the field of the canvas, the different kind of activity that goes around the edges as opposed to the center, that to me is a very significant shift in the way that the paintings come about and in the visual space that's being represented. And so that to me is even a bigger change than whether the people are green or white or whatever. When I was young, I was very interested in what we used to refer to as cavemen. And I looked at a lot of representations of so-called cavemen when I was young. And I used to fantasize a lot about what it would have been like to live in the Stone Age. And you know, all these things terms we don't really use anymore, but they really stayed with me on the level where my imagination resides. So when I started realizing my work was really compelling me to try to engage with this kind of subject matter, I always knew that I wanted it to feel like it could be have a certain timelessness, like what males and females would be in some either pre or post technological situation. There are no representations of objects, there are no representations of clothing, there's no representation of much of anything other than just the fact that one exists in a body, and that this has to be supported by nature. That was really the premise of the earlier paintings. This is a departure from that idea that they're supported by nature into something that's more abstract and perhaps alien, but still that same impulse to make images of people that are both non-specific and also completely recognizable. I've been reading science fiction since I was 10 years old. It just was it was something that grabbed me, and it's the direction my imagination has always gone toward things that are somewhat fantastical and technologically beyond our means as a way to think about where we find ourselves now. And there are a lot of, science fiction is also an extremely visual genre. You know, you have to, I mean, all fiction is, but I think particularly in a lot of good science fiction, you're given words that describe things that you've never seen before, and you have to be able to imagine them, whether they're creatures or technologies or worlds. And that all was greatly appealing to me when I was a kid, and it just kept being so. So now I used to feel a little embarrassed that I was so interested in reading what were allegedly crappy books. The basic premises of science fiction, the idea that you're looking at our world through imagining worlds that don't exist, I guess I see that very much as the way I operate as an artist. It's still there as a way I frame a lot of things I think about. This idea of an image framed off from its surroundings is intrinsic to printmaking, of which I've done a great deal. And also, for years, I've kept little notebooks where I would make notional sketches of what a painting might be, and I would rule it off from the page in the notebook. So it was very familiar to me, the idea of something with a margin. But I wanted it to be equally alive and active with the nominal subject. So I had to see if that could even work. And once I had satisfied myself that it could exist in the paintings, which I felt very clear about after I'd finished that first group of 4 paintings, I just kept going with it. And I think my sense of the rigidity of the flatness of the plane started to loosen. I've always felt that what we call illusionism is one of the materials available to someone making paintings. Size and scale are the same in the sense that a human looking at a very large painting has a certain experience that's different from looking at a very small painting. But what's gotten more interesting to me within the paintings is the scale of what's represented. So I'm interested in the idea of a painting that is not, by contemporary standards, enormous, such as this painting, where the scale of what's being represented is rather enormous. I mean, if a human the size of what's in these paintings walked out of the painting and stood in the room, we'd be quite disturbed by that. And it's true of all these things, not the smallest ones. They're more or less life-size, I think, if you actually project them onto a human body. But all the other paintings, which are some quite large, granted, but the scale of what's represented within these quite large paintings is gargantuan. And I don't think we appreciate enough how much we're exposed to that kind of thing in contemporary life, like the billboards, advertisements on the sides of buses and things. I mean, walking past the window of a shop, you see enormously overscaled representations of people. So size and scale are both really interesting to me. The largest paintings in this exhibition, there are two which I began well before any of this whole project of green and related things. None of that was in my mind when I started them. So I can't really say the project culminated by me thinking I should make these two very large paintings. But there was a sort of inner logic to it all that I began with them. They took the longest, and they were the end of it. And there is no work of CARROLL Dunham that doesn't use drawing as a foundation. I wouldn't even know what it would mean to make painting without drawing. That's always been true in the sense that I have always drawn a lot. I've always used drawing as a kind of laboratory for thinking about other things. It had a lot to do with trying to allow drawing to become both the foundation and a kind of central element in painting. Now that's all kind of come back in this work. It's literally true that there are drawing, the media of drawing are all over the surface of these paintings. There's a lot of openness in the surface of the paintings where drawing is just allowed to exist. I mean drawing with pencils, drawing with crayons. Those kinds of things coexist with painted areas to me in a way that's completely equal. If you read across the surface of one of these paintings, there's paint, there's open, empty areas, there's drawing. All of it goes together, kind of knits together to create the picture, the whole event on the surface of the painting. But now drawing is just completely coexisting with everything else in a way that I have to explore further now. I mean, it seems to be the direction things have been going. Now, I always had the idea that drawing was something that could have scale and could take up as much space conceptually as a painting. A few years ago, I got interested again in the idea of drawing on stretched canvases because it's just different from drawing on paper. It gives one a different feeling. It's different to look at something that, and a canvas is almost like a little platform for the image. It's got a physicality that paper doesn't have. It has a depth at the edge that separates it away from whatever wall it happens to be on. Drawing on stretched canvases started to become just something I was doing, and it led to these small paintings and also a lot of the discrete events within the bigger paintings. I'm really open to a wide range of emotional reactions to my work. If anything, I suppose I look forward to that. But I do know when I think things are being badly misinterpreted. And the only thing that can be misinterpreted is my intentions, because the painting is a fact. The painting exists and people are free to react to it however they react. And I can react to their reaction. So the fact that have made several series of paintings which are undeniably images of people having sex, males and females copulating, that is the subject. There isn't really any other way to look at the image. But because that's an utterly common and ubiquitous human activity, its thrill factor is of very little interest to me. And I'm much more interested, to the extent that it interests me narratively, I'm more interested in the fact that thus far in human history, that event had to occur for any of us to exist. I think that the insistence on formal structure, we'll call them abstract picture values, that one has to navigate a relationship between seeing that and understanding that it's a picture of people having sex, and that those things are both true, and in some way they're both meaningful. I suppose it also pushes, for me, very far to the background any notion of prurient interest level to the paintings. They would be remarkably unsatisfying as pornographic material. They offer nothing in that regard, quite intentionally. I mean, these are human things. I mean, that's to me, if there's anything going on in this whole group of work, it's just trying to get at, essential human things as subjects that allow you to then extrapolate to making a painting. And that's how I think of it, but how other people see it or think of it isn't something I really am even interested in controlling beyond maybe saying, whoa, no, that's not where I'm coming from.